All right. So we've talked about conservatism and the different kind of premise and values behind that. And now we want to focus a little bit on what Morgan Marietta has to talk about concerning the liberal ideology. So let's take a look at that. So here are the liberal premises, and there are three of them. And you can see that in some respects they're very almost kind of the opposite of what we would see from modern American conservatism. So human nature is good, a basis of anti-foundationalism, and then perfectionism. And what do they mean? Well, perfectionism is the idea that the world can change and that we can be the ones that can change it, right? Now, conservatives oftentimes will take a look at it and say, well, allow market forces to be able to do things, the free market, the free hand of the market will determine the outcomes. Liberals, in essence, say something a little bit different, and that is that the government should take an active role in helping to perfect the world, right? And that through public policies, there can be a way to make people's lives better. So again, this notion that things may not be perfect right now, but over time things can change and things can get better is more or less kind of part and parcel of liberalism. The second thing, and you'll see that this is a very different kind of concept than what we would see from conservatives, is the idea of human nature being good. So unlike conservatives who believe that, we can kind of perfect people or make them better if we kind of give them values and mores, but they can eventually, if left on their own, will regress back to this kind of state of nature. When we discuss liberals, basically they believe that there are bad people in the world, but those people aren't naturally bad. Those people are living in an environment in which the circumstances that they live in create bad people. So people that, for example, would be involved with crime are oftentimes people that have not been brought up in the right environment because of poverty, because of lack of education. And if we were to provide these people the appropriate amounts of education and if they had the same resources as everybody else, they would be able to live a good life and not, a life of crime. So essentially, liberals believe that people were only really bad because of the circumstances that they find themselves in, and oppression, deprivation, racism, and so forth are the reasons behind that. The final thing that we can see is the idea of anti-foundationalism. And this is the notion that, unlike conservatives who essentially believe that there is an absolute truth out there, liberals reject the idea of absolute truth. And if you reject that, and you say that there isn't an absolute truth, say for example, a religious value, or a set of religious tenets which we should be guided by, if you reject the idea that there is absolute truth, then you have to pretty much equally value everything in society, right? So perspectives and various perspectives that develop in society should be respected. And there should be a lot of tolerance towards those people who would disagree with us, again, because if there's no absolute truth, who's to say that they're more right or more wrong than what I believe, right? So non-judgmentalism, tolerance is kind of a hallmark then of what we would see with them. Now, what about the liberal core value, right? For the liberal core value, it's the idea of social justice. What exactly does that mean? Well, when we think about social justice, it's essentially that human beings can be good when given the chance to improve, right? And if you're optimistic about the future, but critical of the present, right? Because we have systems of oppression, systems that keep people down. Through the idea of social justice, we can basically cure the failings of society and create a more just order, right? That's the idea of social justice. So, essentially all those things that keep people down can be changed, and we should work more heavily towards trying to accomplish that change. And we can create a more free and a more equal society by putting people on a level playing field so that everyone can succeed. And again, because liberals believe that we can become better over time, creating that level playing field will make things better. Right? So 3 things that they focus on, as you can see at the bottom of the slide here: equality, group orientation, right? Different types of groups in society, focus on them, and then a government that is responsive to the needs of its people. So that gets us to the liberal central problem. Right? For conservatives, it was the glue problem. For liberals, it is what we can call the oppression problem. Right? So one of the things that they take a look at here is who is oppressed more and what social ills take a priority. Right? Now, here's the interesting thing. You say to yourself, well, does that really make sense? Like, is it all just about which group should be serviced first? Well, I had a lot of time to think about Marietta, and I've gone through a lot of kind of soul searching as to whether or not this is actually true. And I think at the end of the day, it probably is, because there's a certain amount of consensus among liberals that there are problems, and it wouldn't be that hard to solve the problems if only we gave attention to those problems. So, for example, how would we deal with poor people in society? Well, we'd redistribute income, right? You make more money, you get taxed more heavily. That money goes towards programs that help people in poverty. If we have discrimination, what do? Well, we have affirmative action to help those people that have been historically discriminated against get, again, on a level playing field. We've got a problem with the environment, with pollution. What do? Well, we regulate industry in such a way as to prevent that pollution from occurring. So when you take a look then at the liberal kind of theory of life, it's not so much kind of consternation about how to accomplish the goals, it's how do we prioritize each one of these segments of society that needs help. And that's the central problem, the oppression problem, right? Who's the most oppressed? Who needs to have their issues addressed now? And that essentially leads to the various different liberal branches, right? So you can see here at the top, when we talk about the oppression problem, we've got immigrants, ethnicity, African Americans, race, poor people based on class, gay based on sexual orientation, women, gender, and then finally, and this is a little bit more difficult to kind of describe in relationship to the others, is the idea of the environment and nature. So let's take a look at these branches of liberalism. So for class, people that want to focus on class first basically say that the poor as a class are the most oppressed people in society. And their lives are most profoundly impacted by inequalities in society, and by the basis of social justice, we should focus on them first. Race. People that focus on race first particularly focus in on African Americans, and the notion is that because of the historical legacy of slavery in the United States, because of the historical legacy of segregation and lack of voting rights, particularly in southern states after the Civil War up through the 1960s, and then continued kind of racism in American society, African Americans should get priority over other groups in society, and their needs should be addressed first. Gender, the idea that historically women have been given less priority in society next to males, and that the structure of government has oftentimes been advantageous to males, both through the capitalist economy and the way the government's been structured and laws have been structured to help men. The idea is that there's been a patriarchal society. The first thing that we should address, since women actually compose more than half of the American population, is that we should focus on these issues of gender. Sexual orientation. Here's one, again, the notion that there's a class of people who biologically have been, because of their sexual orientation, have been basically made second-class citizens in American society, and that we should, again, give them the same type of civil rights that we gave African Americans in the 60s, and focus in on incorporating gays and lesbians into American society as we have other groups throughout American history. Ethnicity and immigrant status, basically, again, types of second-class citizens that have come into the United States. We're having a lot of debates right now, obviously, about immigration. But part of this is that we're all human beings, regardless of where you come from, regardless of the circumstances that you find arising for you to be in this country. You should be given the same dignity and respect as anybody was that might have been a citizen here or come through documentation as through undocumented workers, and they should be the first people to be to be addressed. And then finally, and again, I mentioned here, this is kind of one of those things where it kind of seems a little odd to throw in environmentalism. We're talking about different class of human beings here. You know, the poor, African Americans, women, people on the basis of sexual orientation, ethnicity, and immigration status, and then all of a sudden, bang, at the bottom, Marietta's got environmentalism. And I think, you know, this is a real interesting aspect of the argument that Marietta makes. And that is, in essence, that when you talk about oppression, you know, raping and pillaging the earth and making sure that we have an earth that is here in the future almost takes on its own anthropomorphization. In other words, the earth itself becomes a human being for some strands of liberalism, in which the earth and preservation of the earth and the environment is a matter of social justice that takes precedence over all living human beings. And therefore, while the other people on this list of things in the branches of liberalism are certainly very important when we talk about oppression, there are so many social justice aspects that come as a consequence of the environment that that's the thing that should be addressed first, right? So when we take a look at that tree, it's a little bit more complicated, I guess, than the conservative tree, but in some ways less. There's more agreement on how problems should address, but the question is who should get their issues addressed first. So let's just take a quick look here. I think, you know, in many respects you can kind of apply all these ideologies to the various issues that we might talk about, but it's important for us when we think about issues that are important to American politics to focus in on how these things may affect individual issues. So, you know, abortion, take a look at the conservative side, you know, tradition, religiosity, is a foundational aspect of this. So abortion could be viewed as kind of a method of birth control. It could be a way to stop kind of the nuclear family, and therefore it's not something that conservatives look for. Secularism, openness, the willingness to be able to give women more freedom by virtue of methods of birth control leads kind of liberals to be more tolerant on that aspect. Affirmative action for conservatives, that's something that is verboten. Again, the idea that you're an individual, not a class of people, that you have the ability to be able to achieve on your own regardless of your status in society would, and that everybody should achieve on their own would be an aspect that they would focus on. Again, think about the liberal perspective on all of this is the idea of social justice, equality, and what ultimately Marietta would call the idea of liberal guilt is that we have to rectify past problems, and one way to do this would be affirmative action. And there are a couple of other issues here. I think you can take a look at them. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on them. These slides are also in shared files. You can take a look at these. But you know, issues like gay marriage, gun rights, illegal immigration, things like inheritance taxes, things like national health care, terrorism, war, and war as a tool of foreign policy and welfare spending are all things that divide us based on the way that we view the world and the way that we apply that ideology and worldview to the basis of individual issues. Right? So I think that's really the value of kind of understanding what Marietta is saying. From here we can move forward and kind of take these precepts of liberalism and conservatism, and hopefully it helps us understand how we need to issue frame things when talking to different types of people, and also in many respects to help us understand that oftentimes people talk past each other. We are having two separate conversations. Two worldviews exist in which there isn't really a common set of language, and as a consequence of that, it makes it more difficult to be able to reach consensus.